Welcome to The Conversation. I am Kwame Thomas. On today's episode, we're exploring Jamaica's political landscape beyond the two-party system, asking what it would take for third parties to gain traction. Here to help us unpack this is Dr. Christopher Charles, Professor of Political and Social Psychology at the UWI Mona campus. Welcome to The Conversation. So, welcome, Dr. Charles. How are you?
I'm good.
So, let's begin with the roots. Jamaica's two-party dominance dates back to 1944, but is there room for change today?
Change for?
Well, to account for an additional party or even more than two additional parties.
All right, so Barbados has a two-party dominant system. They have done well.
Yeah.
France has a loose party system, meaning that one leader, so popular, can just leave a party and takes one half of the country or a third of the voters with him or her. And you have multi-party systems.
Kenya has that system too.
So my basic argument here is that it is not whether it's a two-party dominant system, a multi-party system, or a loose party system, as in France. Kenya has one too.
Yeah.
It is the quality of governance and the type of party system don't really influence the quality of the governance. You can have high or low governance any system.
But then how does this affect the public's perception towards political alternatives, though?
So
the fact that we have always been a two-party and now we're hearing something else.
So the public said they wanted an alternative?
No, that's why we're trying to find out. Well,
the public,
we can look at the recent
they don't want an
reports.
alternative. What they want is for to establish parties to do much better. Yes.
So you're saying off the bat there's no space, there's no desire for a two-party, or a multi-party system, or beyond the two-party?
I've not seen any such data to suggest that.
So are there any social or political factors that might have allowed this particular dominance, though, to maintain control for this long, despite changing times and issues?
Long?
Well, for the past 80 years, that's what we're talking about.
All right. It's actually very difficult to dislodge the two major political parties. They came out of the birth of the nation. They came out of nationalist movements. They were at the start of the creation of Jamaica as an independent state. They were involved in the creation of trade unions, in negotiating with the British for independence and so on. So they have a long history. They have tradition. And so, as a matter of fact, their leaders, the early ones, were actually trained by the British to lead under a system called diarchy, or what I call Westminster apprenticeship. So remember, there was a chief minister.
Yes.
He was an apprentice prime minister. That was no much than Manley.
Yeah.
So the British, after they exploited and raped and plundered and murdered and robbed us blind, and they realized that there was nothing more to take, they started to prepare the mulatto leaders to take over. And that's why you had internal self-government and so on. So they prepared the political elite to take over. And those elite came out of the two major political parties that came out of a national movement starting in 1944. So these two political parties are well established because they have a track record. Even if you don't like them, they have done some things. We have a political system, we have roads, we have water, we have light, we have telephone, we have schools, we have universities, we have an army, we have the police force, and so on. You might not like
institutions.
You might not like how some of these operate, right? But we have functioning institutions. You might not like the quality of the output, but nevertheless, we are an upper middle income developing country, so we have done some good things. Not everything that I would like to see, but they still have a track record despite the criticism that people like myself and my colleagues at the university and elsewhere,
Would have.
despite what we say, they have done some things, right? And the people know this, and the people will continue to criticize because the people are not okay. They are not, satisfied. That is why you have low voter turnout.
But switching a little from to the last thing that you stated, low voter turnout, it seems to be a problem world over. It's not just unique to Jamaica, because we look at the last election that was held by our neighbors to the north. They had roughly 20 million fewer voters than they had.
But what proportion of the voters list? It's over 50%. Isn't it over 50%?
Just about. It's just about. It's about 130 plus million persons voted, so that would have been roughly a third.
No, it's not. It's not a percentage of the population. It has to be a percentage of the registered
voters list.
Registered voters.
So what we do
I can't give you that number.
So that number might not be readily available. No, but what we do know.
It is, but I just don't know what it is at this time.
Is that roughly 150 voted the last time before this, and then now we have 130 plus. So there's still a smaller amount than what voted. So it seems to be trending down as well.
But I can't use the raw numbers. I would need to know the registered voters to determine the proportion, the percentage. Right? Because in our case, it is what? But just about 30%?
Yes, it's definitely under 50%, yes.
Yeah, no, way below.
30?
Yeah, 30 something. I don't know why I'm not remembering the numbers today, but that low number suggests that the people that voted were really the hardcore supporters. And in the last election, more JLP supporters came out to vote, for a range of reasons, than PNP supporters. Nevertheless, they won. So I'm just saying that even though I'm saying the parties are established and that the people are not necessarily seeking an alternative, they are seeking improvement from the two established parties, the people are not satisfied, as indicated in the low voter turnout. So
we're saying then that so we're looking beyond their colonial history, we're looking beyond the political alliances, because these no doubt would have factored in their sustained grips. But are we saying that, is there a shift away from these alliances in any way, or is it that they're deeply ingrained so that will still matter?
I don't see a shift. Even with the political and low voter turnout, even the people who are not voting, looks to them at election time. They're on one side or the other.
So it's cultural.
No, it's deeply ingrained. We're socialized to support one of the two major political parties. So remember, while we encourage people to vote and we want more people to vote, in a liberal democracy, if it's only one person who voted, it is still democratic, as long as it is free and fair and free from fear.
Yes.
So a lot of people, when you listen to the political commentators, you're often misled when you listen to them, because it is good that we are arguing for more people to come out and vote, and we tie this low voter turnout to poor governance, rightly so. But in terms of the rules of democracy, of liberal democracies across the world, what you want is that those who decide to vote or want to vote can be registered and duly registered and are free to do so.
Without coercion.
Without
fear.
Without fear. Right? That is the important thing. So I hear them saying there's no threat to democracy. Right?
None whatsoever.
No threat to democracy, no matter what we say about who is authority and who is not. No. What you'll find is that one of the reasons for the low voter turnout, there are others in us, is largely governance, right? The governance issues across the decades. But one of the reasons, too, for low voter turnout is the fact that the two parties are on the same trajectory in terms of outputs, policies. They're not really different in terms of what you're going to get in terms of policy outputs. And let me give an example. 1980 was one of the highest voter turnout in the history of Jamaica.
Yeah.
Why? The two parties were at odds, and people saw the different paths as as a zero-sum game. If they win, Jamaica loses. And so either side saw it that way.
Yeah.
And so because for them, the survival of the country was at stake, they came out. Now when you have the two parties following IMF conditionalities, right, there's not much room to maneuver. So the policies are going to be similar. You can have transformative policies within this framework, but I haven't seen the only transformative leader I have seen so far is Michael Manley. Mr. Siaga comes close because of his length of time and the amount of institutions he built.
So how do you define that, though, the transformative leadership?
It is taking the country and the people beyond what they expected. So, for example, think about it. Every year at the university, there are students who cannot pay their tuition. And sometimes the university deregisters them, and then the government or their parents rush in and try to pay the tuition so they can sit the exams. When I was in high school and just before I entered University of the West Indies, students never paid any tuition. And they got boarding grant, which would be the hall fee. So you would get the hall fee for the year, and you didn't pay any tuition.
Yeah.
So think about if we could do that now for our students. Well, that is what Michael Manley did.
Yeah.
So I'm saying it is policies that are very big and impactful and that will transform the lives of the majority of a certain segment of the population, a certain target group or large numbers of your population. The only thing with that, we weren't producing enough, we weren't growing enough, and so we couldn't sustain that kind of free education system.
All right, so we're going to hold at that. We're coming up on our break now. Just want to remind you that you are watching the conversation. We're looking at the need or the desire or the lack thereof for a third party, whether or not there is space for that. And for that particular discussion, I am sat here with Dr. Christopher Charles. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. We're looking at the historical dominance of the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party. Just before the break, though, we started looking at the idea of a zero-sum and the neoliberal practices that both parties have, and we went as far as to say that would have been the reason why you might have, to some extent, low voter turnout.
Because they're doing the same thing.
Because we're doing pretty much the same thing. Now, we saw a recent poll looking at the whole idea of third party, and there was, not that it endorsed, but 21% were undecided as to whether or not they would vote for or against a third party. What should we take from that? We understand that 62%.
I can't take anything from that.
62.6% they were unwilling.
I can't take anything from that. If the system is so bad, as some of us like to say, and we critique it, and 21% can't say if they would support a third party. Obviously, the third parties are in trouble. Because if things are so bad as we like to criticize, and I'm one of them, if things are so bad, why is it then that the 21% or so are undecided if they would vote for a third party?
So, tell me about the 62.6% now. They are totally unwilling, they are totally against it. What does that say about the barriers now in Jamaican political culture against considering third-party options?
I mentioned this before, that the two major political parties came out of the nationalist movement, came out of the birth of the nation.
The birth of the nation.
Those elites were prepared on a diarchy, which is a Westminster apprenticeship system. So I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing. But internal self-government was preparation. So where the chief minister, the first one was N.W. Manley. So those elites were prepared and trained to take over from the British. And they maintain a lot of the Westminster Constitution, the laws, largely the same, the school system, religious practice. all Anglo.
So,
All Anglo. So they are established. They have history and they have a track record. Whether or not you like it, they have a track record. And Jamaicans across generations have been socialized to support one or the other. Even when we say we are beyond political tribalism, as I have said, and we operate, when we speak publicly, we try and have a balanced view, and we go where the evidence leads. Even that, most of us still have a preference. That is how we have internalized the political socialization. And so even if we criticize both, we still have a preference.
Still have a preference.
That's most Jamaicans. And you see it when the trumpet sound and the bell rings.
So tell me now, these particular figures though, are they consistent with any voter studies that you might have conducted or been exposed to?
I mean, no, I don't look necessarily at how voters feel about these issues, but I can look at the polls from the 1970s. We have always had people who are undecided. That's always a category. So political parties have always been unpopular, or the thought of them. So I'm not surprised that at this time, 21% would say, I'm not sure. Because voters are sure what they're going to do, You know why? Because no matter what we think of them or you think of them, they know that the party in power can do a lot of things to take their lives, make their lives better or substantially worse, or take away their fundamental rights and freedoms. They know these things. So saying that they're undecided is saying to me as a political scientist that they prefer to stick with, and I'm using this advisedly, the evil they know.
Yeah. So I've gone as far as to hear that, it's about the cleanest dirty shirt. That's one of the analogies that they've used. But some might have argued
I'm going to rebel against that comment as one of the fiercest critics of the political parties. To be fair, they have done some good things.
Well, I don't think we can ever go against that, because it's obvious.
They have done some good things.
Yeah.
When I went to the United States, when I went to live in the US,
yeah,
I had a master's from Jamaica. I was like, my program in political science was in the top 10. And when I switched to psychology, it was also in the top 10. And I did very well. I mean, I held my own. And I came out of a public school system, from primary to high school, traditional high school, to University of the West Indies. And I've seen the quality of the education. Of course, there are weaknesses, because you have the secondary schools and so on. But I'm saying, as a beneficiary of Jamaican taxpayers, I migrated highly educated at the expense of Jamaican taxpayers. I would want more people to be educated as I was when I migrated. So I'm saying, even although I'm critical at times, I would never say
it's not that bad.
It's the cleanest dirty shirt.
It's not that bad then.
No, I'm get a little touchy about that.
No,
even though I criticize
right,
them all the time.
That's all right. But some have also argued though that there might be a lack of familiarity with the third-party platform, and that's one of the reasons why so many Jamaicans might be hesitant to vote for them. That's one of the arguments. Do you think that this reluctance though indicates a deeper psychological resistance to change, or is it simply about familiarity and fear of the unknown?
So let me put it this way. The LAPOP survey, this is Vanderbilt University, is a major part of it. They do this survey in Latin America and the Caribbean, a barometer survey, and they ask a range of questions, public opinion, and one is trust, how well Jamaica trusts their institutions. And for some time, the most trustworthy institution was the JDF. I doubt they're anywhere near there now, given the politicization of the JDF in recent times, and more soldiers being caught in illegal activities and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes around, JDF will lose that
standing.
Yeah, that standing. So how they're responding to the third party is, we don't trust institutions, right? Given what we have experienced, Even though we have our preferences, we're still not very satisfied. So we have some issues. We're not going to throw them away. We're not going to abandon them even when we don't vote. We still have a preference.
No, we can't throw the baby with the bathwater.
But we are suspicious of new players. Because the new players are not showing us that they are
There's no track record.
They don't have a track record, that they are new and different. We're not hearing ideas around which the majority of people can converge. So, for example, let me give you one thing I've been talking about for years with politicians on both sides and among my colleagues. Jamaica can't move forward without a mass transit system. Everybody will tell you, oh, we got 50 new buses or 100 new buses. And it takes you, when I just came back from the United States, it took me 2 hours from Papine, hour and a half from Papine at 5, hour and a half from Ligoni to get to my class. I wanted something Ligoni, and I ran down there at 5 to get back for 6. And I arrived at the class at 6:30. Right? It took me an hour and a half just for a 5-minute drive. We have to have a mass transit so we can move large amounts of our people quickly. We can't develop without that. And I haven't heard anybody from the JLP, from the PNP, from whichever political party, third parties, they're not thinking big. They are not thinking big.
So this goes back to the first point that you raised earlier. It's more of the same then, because there's no point, there's no new thing for them to coalesce around. So let's just leave you out because you're just coming to add to the conundrum.
So let me give you an example. So I have been fortunate to talk with and politicians on both sides have consulted with me. So let me just share something without saying which side. I always talk about things that can be done. And in the past, when we were thinking about updating our laws so that fines are really punitive, because £2 in 1960 might be $2 now.
Yeah.
Right? So why not create a law called the Adjustment of Fines Act that allows you, the court staff, to use information provided by BOJ and POJ, right, and information from the judge that these are the laws that pertain to this case, and the court staff are trained, and the law empowers them to use a particular inflation formula to adjust for inflation. So you just do that with one law, and you don't have to be updating laws every 10 years, every 7 years. So that politician at the time said to me, so where is it occurring? So the issue is not that we can solve a problem. If it's not happening elsewhere, we can't do it.
There's nothing new and different. But
right? So
hold that thought, though, because we have to go to...
So I'm just giving an example. There are things we can do.
To foster that.
No, to change things. But we think in simple, basic ways. We're into the basics. Repair a road, widen a road, repair a bridge.
All right. So with that, we'll continue after these messages. You're watching The Conversation. And after that, we'll be joined by Mr. Joseph Patterson. He is the leader of the United Independent Congress. Continue to stay with us. New. Okay. No, man. So when we come back, we can just go to key challenges for third parties. Yeah, that's segment 2. Yeah. So the only one question I might ask him from segment 1, and that would have to do with what you call it, the whole the polls, that's literally the only question that I'd ask him there. And then, yeah. So I'll welcome him, and then I'll just ask him, tell him about the polls and ask him what's his interpretation of it. And then we'll just move into segment 2. Key challenges for third parties and so on. So that's why I'm late. Can I give wrong direction? I just asking.
So you don't know what digital building?
Wow. so, all right. So what I'll do, I'll welcome him, then I'll look to the prompter. Recent polls show that 62.6. Welcome back to the conversation. As stated before we went to the break, we will be having, or we now have with us, the leader of the United Independent Congress, Mr. Joseph Patterson. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
Thank you for having me. My pleasure to be here and, looking forward to the discussion.
So, recent polls show that 62.6% of Jamaicans are unwilling to vote for third parties, while 21% remain undecided. What's your perspective on engaging these undecided voters?
Well, I think what you need to do is to look at the polls the way they should be looked at. In every poll in Jamaica, you find a sizable number of Jamaicans who are not willing to vote. That's your 62%. You have another 30+% who are willing to vote. So what the poll tells us is that 16% is willing to vote for the UIC and 22% are not sure. Unfortunately, the way it's spun is that 62% do not want to vote for the UIC. 62% do not want to vote for anybody, and that's the norm. In the last election, the local government, 70% did not vote. 29% did. In the election before that, we had about 63% who voted and 37% who did. So it's nothing new. The key thing is that finally we have talked about the third party issue, so we know that they're occupying approximately 16% of the population, which is not bad when you compare that with the other two parties, who generally get somewhere between 30 and 40% of the votes.
So that's a lot to consider, though, because I'm just looking now at, and naturally we're going to be looking at the 62.6, because that's roughly 63%. And you know that those are the ones who are unwilling to vote for, are unwilling to even consider a third party. Does that mean, no, that all the odds are stacked against you?
Absolutely not. Again, we need to properly understand the stats. What the stats are telling us is that a majority of Jamaicans are turned off from the political process. What we should be talking about is why they're turned off from the political process and how to re-engage them. At the moment, roughly 30% or so are still engaged. Of that 30% or so, 16 out of the 32 or so, 33% are willing to vote. For the UIC, 22% say maybe they're iffy about it. Of course, they're going to vote for the other two parties. In fact, the current Prime Minister only got 21% of the votes in the last election. If you compare the total voter population, the current opposition, they only got 16% of the vote of the last general election. So generally, what you're seeing is 16%, like for the opposition, is willing to vote for the UIC in an election. Now, the problem we have is, though, is identification. The UIC is not normally in the media because the media doesn't really talk about us. I'm very happy you have us on now. But the more the media allows us to be a part of the conversation is the more you're going to see people beginning to talk about the UIC and their willingness to vote for us.
All right. Dr. Charles, you want to add some context, or is there anything that you'd want to add to what he has said?
The first thing is political apathy. How it's normally defined is a disconnection from or disengagement from the political system expressed through not voting. But people block roads still.
Yeah.
People protest. People cuss MP when them say it might not be the ways and means that we would want. So people still engage in a number of ways. So that's one. Two, the large number of apathetic voters is not automatic that they're going to vote for anybody else. We have no such evidence. So, so if my friend here has that evidence, and some of us, we love to see things happening in the political system because that gives us things to study. So if you have the evidence or you see something, because I'm not on the ground in that way, like when you are head of a political party, tell us. Because we know from decades of research in Jamaica and elsewhere that not because people are turned off from party A and B, means if it's automatic that if a party C comes up,
they'll support
the party C. So that's not necessarily so. So we need to know, how did you arrive at that?
Sure. I mean, well, I'm not saying that they will vote one way or the other. I'm speaking to what the poll told us. The poll said, we've looked at the 100% of the population. 62 said that they're not interested in voting for a third party. And we can equate that to the fact that we know that roughly 62% or so will not vote for any party, because that has been the trend of all the polls. The election shows the same result, and polls taken shows the same results, that a big portion of Jamaicans are not interested in voting. And then the rest now, what is left, the 40% or so that is left, how do you break that out? Within that group, we see where 16 out of the 100% is willing to vote for a third party or the UIC, and 22% are willing to look at any other party, including the third party. Now, that's consistent with all other polls, which shows that roughly 30 to 40% of all Jamaicans will be voting. Who they vote for is a matter now of what happens in the election cycle.
That sounds like just a little bit of optimism, because we have made we're pretty much eisegeting, we're putting in our own understanding of this, not necessarily what the numbers say, but we're reading into.
The numbers numbers are just numbers.
The numbers are just there.
Let's give you proportion. It is interpretation.
Exactly.
And the best way to interpret is what we know from...
So you interpret based on historical data?
No, for what we know from voting behavior. What we know. Remember that the polls is a snapshot. Jamaicans and other voters have told that they'll do all kinds of things. And when it comes to the election, it is something else. That 16%, I have seen more resourced, more organized, with backing from rich segments of the business community, fail.
Yeah.
I wish you and your organization all the best, but I'm waiting to see what that 16% of which you speak will do, because historically they have not done much. And it doesn't mean that there will not be change, but for us as professional observers and researchers, for us to get excited, what we are hoping for is to hear policy ideas around which large numbers of Jamaicans will come and say, whoa, Mr. Patterson, G's and P's and Lord of mercy.
Lick the nail on the head. This is what I've been waiting on.
Right? All we want from you now is how you think you're getting funny. You can't be tribalist. You have to go, and so on. We haven't heard anything like that from the PNP, JLP, or your side.
I can tell you one.
Now is your opportunity.
I can tell you one. I mean, but back to your main point, though, you know, you won't reach the Jamaican people if you're not seen by the Jamaican people. And the third parties are not normally seen because they're kept out of the media. The UIC, for example, have tremendous policies which the media isn't talking about. I'll give you one. We have been very clear that Jamaica needs to embark on what we call land reparation. Since 1838, when the slaves were freed, and again in 1944, when they gave us the right to vote, and in 1962, when they gave us a fake independence. From then until now, they have not returned the land that was stolen from our ancestors. The UIC is saying, when you elect us, we're going to return the land that was stolen from your ancestors to you. So we're going to have land reparation. That means every single Jamaican whose ancestors were enslaved in this country will be entitled to land, free and clear, and they will not have to pay a property tax on this, because you can't be paying an annual rent on the land and say you own it. So if you want to be a landowner, then we have to make sure there's no subsequent perpetual property tax on it. So land reparation and the abolition of perpetual property taxes. That's a key policy. Now, if that was to be published across all the news channels that the UIC is offering Jamaicans land reparation. That's a big deal. If we want to dig into it and how it's going to work and how it's going to be impactful on the economy, what it's going to do for people, creating generational wealth, that's the kind of conversation we want to have. Instead, guess what they do? They call us every time there's an election and they say, let's talk about how third parties doing elections. Let's stop having that conversation and let's talk about the policies that the UIC has put forward.
So I would like to jump in here. My students at university are surprised that I follow social media and I can tell them all kinds of things about what's happening. There are more influencers in Jamaica social media space that are more popular than your political party. And I'm saying, I'm a little disheartened that you expect that the establishment, including the traditional media, that they're going to carry you. I was hoping that you would say that your organization will be hitting the ground running. You're always out there, one-to-one. It takes time, you know. It might not be now, it might be 10 years, it might be 15, but just stay on the ground, meet people, explain, share, give a flyer, send email. That kind of in the trenches, underground work, that's what does it.
Well, I thought you would know better than that, because that kind of work you're talking about is being done and can only be done with resources. But outside of that, comparing us in terms of popularity, one second.
Go on.
When it comes on to popularity of the people you're talking about, we know that people who are in entertainment and sports or in Cascas are going to be more popular than a political party. Jamaicans are not excited about politics outside of what they're used to with the two. So we can't use that as the gauge. The real issue is this: Jamaica has 3 active registered political parties, and the news media only carries 2. If you want to have if we say we care about democracy and we want to engage people in the political process, why doesn't the media, every time they carry a story, let's say the story is on crime. Crime, here's what the Prime Minister is saying on crime, here's what the opposition leader is saying on crime, and here's what the UIC leader is saying. Why they stop at just the opposition leader?
Right, so is that a fair comparison?
So, Mr. Patterson, do you understand what liberal democracy demands? Liberal democracy, right, does not require the media to go to any political party to say, right? Liberal democracy, the rules say that when you register to vote, you should be free to do so. Your members should not be coerced. And those who want to vote for you should do so freely, fairly, and without fear. So what you're requiring is as if it's a party and we're all friends. Life is not like that. Life is not like that.
That would be asking for a lot more than anybody would be.
I understand you, I don't disagree. I'm just saying.
Well, I'm not sure you understand me, because what I'm saying is the goal of journalists is to be unbiased.
And to share information to ensure that everybody
So for example, when the UIC puts out a press release on a matter, for example, the constitutional reform, and when you turn on the TV, you see, here's the position of the other 2 parties on this matter, and you don't see the press release from the UIC, then what is the point?
But use social media. Before social media, the radicals used to have a bag and they walked around and sold papers. We have social media now, Mr. Patterson.
Of course, if you go on TikTok, you see us having 60,000 people looking at our views, looking at us on TikTok. If you go
why are you quarreling with the mainstream media?
Let me get this point. Let me rephrase this for you.
I want you to hold the point, because we're going to a break now.
Okay.
So just to remind you, you're watching the conversation. I'm here with Professor of Social Psychology and Political Psychology from the University of the West Indies, as well as the leader of the United Independent Congress, Mr. Joseph Patterson. And first you heard from Dr. Christopher Charles. We'll be right back. You're watching the conversation. Welcome back to the conversation as we look into the psychology behind voter loyalty and strategies that might help or hinder third parties. But just before we start looking at that, you were making a point before the break, so I'd love to hear what you have to say on that issue.
Well, I wanted to point out that Jamaica's 2-party system is one that has been cemented by the business community, the PSOJ oligarchs in particular. They're the ones who have maintain, for example, if any of the two parties no longer receive the financial backing that they're now receiving, they would just become very weak, right? So we, in the UIC, the United Independence Congress, we are building from the ground up by reaching people where they are, and we're growing. But it's by donations from ordinary Jamaicans around Jamaica and in the diaspora as well.
But could it be then, because I heard what you're saying, the PSOJ and the oligarchs, they're the ones that fund the party, but could it be that they do that because these parties have been there from day one? They are part of the birth of the nation, as we have been discussing a little earlier. So it's difficult when you have these parties are now institutionalized.
Yes, yes.
All right, so to consider an additional party who doesn't have a track record, you know, if we're being honest,
Yes.
you don't have a track record, you are literally looking to build now. You know, we have not seen you for the past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Even if you're there and you're losing, we have not seen you. We're just now seeing you. So is it fair to say, all right, so this is why we are not doing well, because we're not being supported to the extent that these two are?
We're not saying we're not doing well. We're explaining to you the environment in which we're operating. And so that environment, we're working within it and making our way, you know, in getting where we need to go to. The bottom line is the people of Jamaica have to see and hear from the UIC for them to know it. So we have to gain traction within social media and on traditional media. And that's not easy, but we're doing it.
So how does party loyalty, Dr. Charles, shape the choices of Jamaican voters, especially given the country's historical two-party system? Do you see any shifts in loyalty among younger voters?
No. We have all been socialized to support one of the two major political parties. And by political socialization, I'm talking about a process of learning, a process in which we learn about politics. And we normally get it from our family, from the schools, from our peers, from the media, from the church, trade unions, and our social networks, our friends. And so for 80 years, since 1944, coming on with the birth of the PNP and then the JLP, these two parties are well entrenched, and they are the standard are the symbols of political competition. So it's very difficult to break that kind of things, especially in a two-part dominant system. And that is why, when I mentioned earlier about on the ground, any third party will take quite some time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
What you want to do is to chip away slowly, but effectively. And as you are chipping away, you're entrenching, right? So that is why I'm saying you can't expect anything from the establishment. Can't expect anything from the private sector, because the private sector, they only fund the party that they think is going to win the particular election. So one of the two will get very little money in the next election, the one that they think is going to lose, much less a third party that has limited or no support at all.
No, we're not asking the private sector to fund us, because we understand what that means. And just so you know, they fund both of those two parties relatively equally. It's not like they give a lot more to one or the other, because these are their two horses in the race. So regardless of which of them the Jamaican people vote for, the outcome is the same. The same oligarchs.
The PNP couldn't get to the money in 2020.
No, what I'm saying is
with that lead, they were starved.
What I'm saying is this. No,
I'm just telling you the facts.
No, they were starved.
Right,
there are times when they will starve one or the other if the leadership gets out of line with their intentions. So if the objectives of the PSOJ oligarchs aren't being met, they're going to adjust their funding. The UIC has stayed clear of that. We're focused on building a grassroots movement funded by the people, owned by the people, and for the people. And that is why if you go to uicjamaica.com or you go to UIC Jamaica on TikTok, you're going to notice that more and more the groundswell is happening from the people of Jamaica. And so when we win, when the UIC eventually wins government, it will be because we're of the people, by the people, and for the people.
So oftentimes voters worry about wasted votes when considering smaller parties. All right, that's the first thing that we have to consider. How do you address this particular concern, and what do you say to voters who feel as though they must choose between the lesser of two evils?
Well, the only wasted vote is the one that you vote in maintaining the status quo. So if you vote to maintain what currently exists, then that's a wasted vote. If you look at the track record of the two colonial parties over the last 80 years, the results are pretty much the same. Whether you give the PNP 18.5 years in office, you end up with FinSAC. If you give the Jamaica Labour Party 8 years in office, you end up with massive scandals. So the bottom line is we have to move away from that now and embrace something new. In fact, the majority of Jamaicans no longer vote for these two parties. So all that remains is for them to become aware of the UIC. And thanks to you and others, we're becoming more aware. People are learning about the UIC as Jamaica's official third registered party. And with that, they will make a change and move forward.
What do you have to say for that, Dr. Charles?
I'm just cautioning the UIC head that it's a long road ahead.
Yeah.
And I am a little disappointed, in terms of comments about the private sector and about when leaders didn't fall in line. Because if Peter Phillips, who didn't get much money when he was leading the PNP, they were starved because they were so behind in the polls. If he's not a representative, if he wasn't a representative of the establishment, he was brought in by Michael Manley.
Yeah.
If he got Glean of the Year, Man of the Year award, right, for so-called macroeconomic stability. If he wasn't representative of the establishment, I don't know who is.
No, well,
anyway, what I'm hoping for third parties, it is you have to have like a 30-year plan. And it sounds long, but if you start in your 20s and you're mobilizing about 30, and the reason why I'm saying this, the established parties have been around. By the time you do that 30-year plan, they've been around for like 110 years. So what I'm saying is it takes painstakingly hard work to build a political party in the trenches, social media, right? That is what...
The key thing, my good friend, is funding. And we're building our funding from the people of Jamaica. If you have a party which is owned by the people, then it will work for the people. Now, of course, you know that the oligarchs control, like this election coming, they'll give over 500 million to these two parties. The UIC will not have that level of funding, but by building a grassroots funding mechanism, we'll be able to reach the people in the ways that you're talking, going door to door and so on. And we're doing that already on very small funding, but we'll do more of it and continue to build. But guess what? We don't have to wait 30 years. And I'll tell you why. Because we're already at more than 60% of the nation no longer supporting these two parties.
Yeah, but you're assuming that because they don't support PNP and JLP,
no, I'm not
it doesn't mean they
assuming.
support anybody else.
What I'm hearing, what I'm hearing is that, listen, they don't like them, so that means automatically that
no,
they
that
like
is your
us.
assumption. What I'm telling you
That's what
is
it
this.
sounds like.
No. What I'm telling you is that they don't like them. I'm not telling you they automatically like us. I'm saying they have come to the realization that voting for either of them will not make a difference in their lives. Now we, the UIC, the United Independence Congress of Jamaica, we will now have to convince them to wake up out of that position now and realize that they can help themselves by joining the UIC and helping us to take government on their behalf and give them a better outcome.
Are there any particular initiative that you have engaged in terms of outreach efforts that you can connect with grassroots and grassroots voters at a community level that you can share?
Absolutely. We have done in Northeast St. Elizabeth what we call the Community Capital Club. And what we have done here is to bring people together to invest in their own capital, creating capital formation to invest in entrepreneurship in their community. We did more than $23 million in that in my area of Northeast St. Elizabeth, and we continue to try to expand that to other constituencies.
So I'm wondering though, in the 63 constituencies,
yes.
Are there UIC
representatives for
groups?
All groups?
Yes. Yeah, throughout the 63 constituencies.
So right now what we have are 12 confirmed Member of Parliament candidates. From Westmoreland to St. Mary to St. Andrew to Kingston. And we're working through. Our goal is to get to all 63, but you have to start somewhere.
Okay.
And it takes a while to build up.
Just
so we're
have
building.
51 left.
Sorry.
You just have 51 left.
And believe me, if we have one elected MP, that one MP could hold the balance of power in a split house. You know that?
Yeah.
Right.
So how important, Dr. Charles, do you think policy distinctiveness is, and are there any particular issues that you think third parties can actually capitalize on so that they can gain voter interests?
All right. So one of my esteemed academic colleague and a friend irked the political parties by saying that corruption is not a PNP and JLP thing, it's endemic to the political system. And they were upset. So I think third parties can make public their own professional lives in terms of service. And to show that I have worked here in the church. I was a treasurer for 10 years, a clean record. When I was in student council in high school, I was a treasurer. I was this, I was that.
No scandals.
Right? And you start to make those things available. So you live your professional life publicly in terms of how you do things. I remember the Lapa poll where Jamaicans tend not to trust institutions, so they're going to be suspicious of the UIC. So the UIC has to function in a way transparent, open, to show that they are radically different. I'm not talking about radically noise in a communist revolutionary sense, but a moral and competently policy sense where you're radically different and can get things done. And all your actions is driven by the interest of the people.
So, good points though. Mr. Patterson, are there any electoral reforms that you can tell us that your party would be willing to support or make so that the system can become more inclusive? We're talking about specific changes, perhaps like proportional representation or so that you would be actively campaigning for.
Sure. We're campaigning for a non-partisan constitutional republic. So we want to make it to be a republic, but we want it to be a non-partisan one. And what we mean by this is we must have a system of campaign financing which is based on 100% publicly funded campaign financing for candidates, not political parties. And that candidates must qualify to run, meaning they need to have certain competencies. Right now, to be an MP, you can just be just about anybody. You need to have people who have certain competencies, certain qualifications, certain experiences, and then on top of that, you must provide public funding so that everybody receives the same access to newspaper, radio, television, internet, town hall meetings and debates, and then you have the people having the information they need to make a quality decision about who they want to represent them. So we have some careful, some well-designed constitutional reform plans, and that's one of them.
Are there any global examples that you can cite?
No, you don't need to. You see, the thing that people need to understand is innovation is innovation. Invention is invention. So we have to move beyond what has always existed. We have to look at how do you build on it. There's a time when you didn't have democracies, and then now you have democracies. A time when you didn't have republics, and now you have republics. Now let's go one step further and making sure we have a non-partisan republic. So we have some radical, if you will, ideas that will transform the political process.
So, Dr. Charles, tell us now, are there any international examples that you probably can highlight? Or better yet, are there any common threads among successful third-party movements that can be applied to the Jamaican context that you can think about?
Well, if we had a multi-party system, meaning that at the birth of the nation,
we had one.
We had more than two. And so the British in that dark year internal self-government, which I call the Westminster apprenticeship system, if four parties were created, then a fifth party, it would be easier to find a space. But it is very difficult now, and that is why I'm saying realistically, think about a generation. Think about 30 years. It's hard work, but if it's done properly and it's planned and you recruit and you're in the trenches for 3 decades, right? Transparent, building your resource base, you may be able to see some change. But come within a few years,
no.
Selling some policies, people are not going to rush towards you like that.
All right, so...
Just given the evidence or the experience they have with the two that are now the dominant ones.
All right, so we're unfortunately out of time for today's program. But Mr. Patterson, Dr. Charles, I want to thank both of you for taking this opportunity to come out and have this discussion with us. And as for you, our viewers, we want to thank you. On behalf of the entire Scene TV production team, I am Kwame Thomas, and this has been The Conversation, where we looked at a number of things, but primarily the idea of third party and the viability for them in Jamaica and our current political system. Until next time, stay informed, stay tuned, stay engaged.